Welcome to a GBA ranking video. If you don't know what the GBA is, the GBA is a competitive Pokemon league. This season, 14 teams drafted 10 Pokemon each, 1 Mega per team, and they go at it week to week with the foreknowledge of what their opponents are bringing and go head-to-head in a traditional sports league style leading up to playoffs and finals matches throughout the season. This video is going to go through the teams and give you kind of a breakdown of what's been going on in the past week and the general season for them and where I think they stack up as far as power goes. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comments, and things like that to help me improve the videos, make them better. And if you have any questions or interested in the GBA, please leave a comment below. Check out the links in the description and go check out the other GBA videos. And we're having a lot of fun this season. That said, let's go ahead and jump right into the rankings.
Still at number one this week, the San Jose Sharpedos. While their win wasn't quite as impressive as the Pelipper's win over Steelix because they were playing the last place Granbuls, it's still a win, so it's hard to take that away from them. As well as the fact that I just think the Sharpedos are probably the one definite playoff lock. I think a lot of other teams might get sniped out or moved out of the last position, but as the winningest team at this point, having kept a great differential throughout the season, I think they're pretty much a lock. Like I've said before, I think they have an incredibly balanced team, and I think it's going to be difficult for anybody to take them out of the playoff spot, and it's going to be hard for people to take them out in the playoffs when they make it there. And I do pretty confidently say win at this point. A big win for the New Orleans Pelipers is going to keep them at number 2. It's a very impressive win, taking out the Steelix again, proving that the first week wasn't a total fluke and that they are a pretty badass team. They move up into the upper brackets as far as win-loss ratio, and they solidly move up to the top differential of the entire league. It's going to be very difficult for anybody else to catch up and take them down. It's possible, but it's going to be rough. John's really gotten together a strong concept of his team and how to make it work. It's not a traditional way we would see it. You know, most people would probably be playing things like Conkeldurr and Talonflame a lot harder than he does. But what he does is working. You know, he's picking out his plays and just forcing, you know, people to come at him in ways that they haven't really been able to figure out yet. It's good strategy. He's working well. He's definitely a contender this year, and it's going to be fun to see how well he can do in the rest of the season. The Pittsburgh Steelix, despite a loss, did manage to lose to one of the better teams in the league, so I'm going to keep him at number 3. I think this is an unfortunate thing where kind of the power difference in drafted teams really hurts Swag. He just doesn't have a lot to deal with the incredible heavy hitters that the Pelipers have. It'll be a little bit easier on him next year when they lose some of the big hitters, including, you know, Sylveon, who was the key to tearing a hole through Joe's team at the end there. But, you know, he plays his game well. He has done amazing work with the team that he has now. He's still the second highest differential in the league, still tied with the Pelipers for win-loss record, and just being one win behind the top win-loss record of the Sharpedos. So I absolutely don't think Joe's out. I think he gets a little discouraged after these losses because, you know, he knows he's a great battler. He just doesn't have all the team elements there that he would normally have to take advantage of. But, you know, he's worked amazingly with that handicap and is a solid number 3 team in this league. The number 4 team on the list is probably going to be a surprise to some people, but I think Cote has put in amazing work with the Toronto Maple Leafeons in this last half of the season, really defying a lot of expectations after a rough start at the beginning of the season. And while you don't have a video from either of the competitors to be able to watch this match, if you go on the WordPress and look at these stats, you'll notice one thing in particular. Cote, despite having the premier rain team in the league, didn't bring rain this week. It would appear that he kind of mentally decided he wanted to prove he could win without being a rain team and just go in and rock them as he did in the earlier wins he had this season. A little bit different from that and a little bit more impressive is not relying on Mega Scizor early on in the season when he didn't have auto rain. almost all of his wins were on the back of Mega Scizor just knocking out huge chunks of the team. This week, no kills from Mega Scizor, and a pretty well-rounded spread from everyone else. Reuniclus, recent trade, getting 2 kills. Crocodile with another 2, and Crit Kingdra, from what I hear, is what was brought, and it getting, another kill, and then some of Danza is just dying to recoil and hazards, such like that. That's pretty amazing to come in here and beat one of the great teams on paper despite their poor performance this year in the LA Nido-Kings, and to beat them without what a lot of people would say is your premier top sellable gimmick. He just came in and won a strong fundamental game, and Kote might win the award for best trade management of the season. He has really done some amazing moves and bulked up his team in a lot of different ways. Some people might question Reuniclus for Kyurem, as Kyurem does have a lot of power, but this just goes to prove he managed to get it the right way, and he's seemingly using it the right way. I've talked to him before a little bit about this, and he's just backed up. I think he does have most of his videos saved, and hopefully we'll get to see them put up sometime throughout the season, or at the very end of the season maybe. He'll get all of those put up, because I really want to see what he's doing, because I definitely think that he's, a confident, solid contender for a playoff spot in his conference this season, and I think he actually may have passed a couple of other people for the scariest team in his conference. It's not quite Pelipers or San Jose Sharpedos scary, but it's getting there, and it seems to be putting a lot of fear into a lot of people and getting him some wins. So props to him for that. Little drop to number 5 for the Red Sox as they go on a little 2-week loss spree. Nothing really fundamentally wrong here, just didn't play as well as the Sawsbucks did this week. Steve came in with a game plan. He executed the game plan. He made all of the right predictions at the right time. It really shows just how well he knows Nick, how easily he's able to get into his head and make the plays that count, totally demolishing and rendering Diggersby ineffective, and then just wiping out the team. This also goes to show that, Nick does have a little bit of that same power disparity that we've seen when I was talking about the Steelix and Joe. And, he's done some things to bulk it up, but it may not quite be there, not quite the trade master that Kote's been. But he's still good. He's still sitting in a good spot to make a playoff run in his season, as long as he keeps focused on it and, really goes into it. So it'll be interesting to see if he can maintain that kind of laser focus he had in the early season and apply it to his last half of the season games and still sneak in there at the end. Or if we may be seeing the collapse of his team. We've seen a lot of teams go on 2-week losses and then keep rolling with further losses and have to snap back. But this late in the season, it's kind of hard to do that. You either have to win or take a very brief loss and then come back and win harder. You can't be a snowball rolling downhill at this point. For all intents and purposes, the Sawsbucks should have probably moved up this week from number 6, as they did beat a very high-ranking team. However, it's a thing where I've just said the top's a really close battle, and as I've said that, other people have fallen out of it, just because I think it's getting closer and closer as the season goes on. And while I do think that it was a solid win, I think Steve did everything in his power to earn that win. No luck or crits really there. It was pretty much pure skill, like I said in the last segment. I still just don't feel like they're there. They've got, a solid 3-man dead weight section of their team, and it's really hurting their, ability to shake up the roster. Fortunately for them, they haven't had to shake it up too much, as it just seems most teams do not have an answer for Victini. He seems to be doing fantastic work for him. It was a great economy pick in the draft, and this week just goes to show when you use it right, it does work. Those base 100s are nothing to mess around with, even in a league where you have things running around with base 140 attack and stuff like that. those little pixies just tear through shit when used right, and that's what Steve's been doing. He's been using the things he has right. I think next year when he has more things that he can use better, it'll be a lot harder to justify keeping him at number 6. I'll have to probably keep him in a higher ranking, assuming he plays this well. But for right now, really the only thing keeping him out is that he hasn't figured out a way to use that dead weight, and it is just dead weight for him right now. The Deoxys actually moved down this week, not for any real reason, just kind of because some other people had to move up because I felt their wins were a bigger deal or go to reflect more accurately the level that those teams are at. I still think the Deoxys have one of the best drafts in the league. Anybody would be lucky to have that team, and it just goes to show, Gubbs is still a great battler, even when he's not necessarily as into it as he is at the start of the league. Not going through and having the time to put up all the videos, he still has the time to show up and win a match. And that's really all you need. So like I said, no real reason that they dropped, just kind of had to because I think it's a little bit more competitive amongst other teams. Not to say that they're out of it by any means. They're still a solid and real playoff threat in their conference. Just maybe not as scary to me as some of the other teams. Little move back up to the number 8 spot for the New York Yankees this week. Finally getting up into the positive win-loss records for the first time in quite a while. And, not exactly getting back to the point of a positive differential, but closing the gap, which is really good and really important for him at this time. If he wants to make a playoff bid, he's going to have to really bump up that differential. As right now, he's still sitting at a -1, and he hasn't really broken the 4+ mark for the entire season. He's really floated right around in the -3 to +4 range for the entire season. He's going to have to focus and lock that down. I think he can, though. This week was a great match for him. Unfortunately, having a little bit of what people are calling shady vision, where he just ignored and didn't see a recovery item despite the animation happening while he was literally talking about what kind of item it could have. Focus is a huge thing. It's a thing I don't really talk about that much because Shady's probably the only coach where you really consistently get to see where his level of focus is at during the battle. It's much easier to come in and do a post commentary and make it sound like you were focused and just made the wrong plays, or luck didn't go your way. With Shady, though, you really see the thought process. You really see things going down, and you see him mess up those things. And then, unfortunately, it really bit him in the ass this week as he lost what was probably a solid 6-0 victory and reduced it down to a 3-0 just because he didn't notice a leftover item and made a silly assumption on a choice item that a thing didn't have. I don't think you're going to see him make that mistake again, at least not for this season. In this series, maybe in some of his other series he might, but hopefully he realizes that 6-0 would have helped him out tremendously, and that he played well enough to deserve it up until that point. Unfortunately, he didn't play that well the whole time, and he made that bad play, and it cost him 3 things. It's a heartbreak of a story, but really, I think it's impressive that he took down Cooper to begin with, and for that alone, it's good enough to move him up. Solid win for the Halucha this week. Their team really matches up well against the Oklahoma City Thunderous. Both times I played them coming out with big wins. I really like most of the things that Fizz did this week. He brought a lot of more peculiar sets with specialized IVs to live some insane things. Taking aerial ace for alligator on a fighting type's pretty cool. Glad to see Keldeo actually doing some work after spending most of its week dying to Life Orb recoil or just getting killed on switch in. And Mega Aggron putting in the work of a giant metal freight train, because that's kind of what it is, especially with 2 rock polishes behind it sweeping through a team. Recognizing that Aggron could do that and utilizing the much criticized and suspected Mew pick early on, finally getting the work out of it that I think it was meant to be. I never thought it was necessarily going to put up huge numbers, but it's good to see it finally kind of fulfilling that support role it's capable of, and that's exactly what it did this week, getting off that sub-baton pass to Aggron. It's good. It just gives it free reign to set up, kept the momentum and the initiative going for Fizz, and he was able to wreck, just totally destroy what was left of the Thunderous at that point with it. Scarf Aerodactyl is also super fun, so I have no problem moving them up to number 9 this week. And for every team that has a great matchup against a team, obviously there has to be the opposite team that has a horrible matchup, and that's kind of the tale of the Thunderous this week. There's something about that ragtag Hawlucha's team that just tears the pretty scary at points Thunderous apart. I think the Thunderous are going to have to reevaluate a little bit going into their draft next year to compensate for that. Maybe give up the sand angle and just go for a more balanced team, as the weather doesn't really seem to be giving them the overpowering edge that is present on the Leafeon's rain team when they decide to use it. That being said, the Leafeons are on kind of a slide right now. It's rough, and it's hard to see a team that is good, has a solid coach, really knows his fundamentals, go on a slide like that. This next week is going to have to be the week that they turn it around, though. If you go to the WordPress and check out the schedule, which you should do after you go there and look at all of the stats for this week so you can marvel at some of the matches that didn't get videos up, you can see that the Thunderous only have one out-of-conference game, which means they really need to win all of the other weeks that they have going on. Next week, they need to take down the Mankeys, who are right in their range for a playoff spot, and easily start catching up. Week after that, the Sawsbucks, who are ahead of them and need to be a team that they need to knock down. Week 12 is their out-of-conference game, so it's just a good win for them to have and a good use to bump up the differential. Week 13 is going to be the Leafeons, who, like I said earlier, I think are a huge playoff contender and are going to need to be knocked down if the Thunderous want to get back up. And Week 14 is, again, going to be against the Sawsbucks, and if he can get 2 wins against the Sawsbucks and knock them down both times, that's really going to help him get back up and get in the running for a playoff spot. And I think he's probably going to need all 4, at least all of his interconference wins to get back up there, especially now that he's dipping into what are medium-range negative differential numbers. He's going to have to start pulling out some big wins, and I think he can do that. Just needs to get back and focus onto that fundamental play and, maybe reevaluate what his win conditions are and things like that. I think maybe a little bit of this week was the frustration of ineffective Mega Charizard X last time he battled the Hawluchas, and he didn't bring it this week, despite the fact that it still was a huge threat and a huge problem. But who knows, maybe he has some other plan. Either way, not out of this yet, but they're really going to have to buckle down. The Jasmine take a rough loss this week. I left a comment on Cooper's video kind of explaining what I think happened, because he's asking for, fan criticism and things like that. In his commentary, he mentions, his thought process for bringing a dual screen Gothitelle and a more offensively minded Cloyster. I think this week, he didn't capitalize on his strength. It's probably the only week in the entire league where I would have told Cooper to go less offensive and go more bulk, just because that has been Shady's big weakness. I also think, I said on his video, he seemed to want to make the Gothitelle dual screens Cloyster sweep work, and I'm not sure that this was the week for it. I think a lot of times players get cool ideas in their heads, and maybe they try and force that strategy and agenda. And while he did manage to execute it, not necessarily to the extreme numbers that he did have a good break and was able to capitalize on Shady's one major fumble and lower the differential split between them. But overall, this just wasn't Cooper's week. I think he may have strayed a little bit farther out from his defensive roots after having one going a little bit more offensive. and he may need to scale it back in balance, which is weird because all season I've been telling him to go for more offense. I think maybe he stepped a bit too far, or it was just a bad week and Shady played better than him. It's kind of hard to tell. Not out of the conference yet, but in their conference, they're going to have a way harder time catching up than they would have if they were in the Kanto conference. Cooper's really going to have to start putting up some big numbers on the board if he wants to make a run for things. At the start of the season, I don't think anybody would have really had the Nido Kings down in the number 12 spot, but here they sit. Not really sure what's gone wrong with the team. Don't have a video this week to really break it down, but it just isn't working for them. They got stopped by the non-rain version of the Leafeons. None of his guys really put up numbers despite having a pretty good spread, I think, of what he brought. I don't know the sets he brought or anything like that, but the pokes seem to be, decent on paper and seem to be things he could have done some work with. However, just didn't do it, That seems to be the story of them disappointing numbers from things like Raiko, who's really done nothing for him this season, despite being a big pick. Hopefully he can turn that around in the last couple of weeks or in the next season. But as for right now, hanging out at that lower tier of the list. The Escavaliers tried, but this week may have just been one where they were kind of outmatched as far as power goes. The threat of Mega Pencer kind of chunking a disastrous hole through their team. Not much you can do about a threat like that if it really gets going, especially with the team he has. He tried. He did do some work with Mienshao, who's been putting in a lot of work with them for the year. I do think he brought the heftier portion of his lineup, which is good. But, sometimes there's just not a ton you can really do. I think he put in a good effort. I think this is going to be a good learning season for him. Assuming Nexus sticks around, I have no reason to think he's not going to. But assuming he sticks around next season, I expect him to do a lot better and to use his draft picks to grab some real power and put up a threat and be a serious, competitor to everyone else in the rest of the league. He seems to be doing better despite the numbers not reflecting it. So hopefully he can turn it around, get a couple more wins on the board, move up, and if not, then apply it to next year. Last place Granbuls, they did put up a fight. They managed to get some hits in, do some damage, which is good. It's more than we've seen from them a little bit. Latios and Lucario getting some kills and, making sure Arcanine went down to recoil. Good stuff. It's been a rough year for them. I think it's going to stay a rough year for them, but I think they've got a much better idea of what they need to do next year with their draft picks. They're making a lot of late season trades to try and bulk up on what they have so that they can complement it with some better picks next year. And I think that's probably going to be the tagline for them for the rest of the season. All right, let's look at the matchups we have going into next week. The New Orleans Pelipers take on the Los Angeles Nido Kings. I think this would be a huge week for the Nido Kings to make a comeback. I think they've got the roster to do it. If anyone does, they do have a fair amount of power and threat on their team. However, I do think the Pelipers are just playing too well at this point. They've got a lot of momentum and a lot of enthusiasm, that kind of winner's mentality going on in their head. I think John's probably going to do a decent job of taking this team out. I can't see it being less than a 3-0, and wouldn't be surprised to have it be yet another weird week of Sylveon putting in a bunch of kills. Next up is a really big interconference match: the Milwaukee Sawsbucks and the Toronto Maple Leafeons. It's going to be one of the first weeks in a while we get to see Kote's team really in action, even if it's only from the Sawsbucks' point of view. It's a big week for them because the Leafeons need this swing in win-loss to really firmly put themselves number-wise in the playoff range and to help try and widen the gap the other teams have. The Sawsbucks obviously want to stop that and want to stay up at the top and widen the gap their own. If they can take down a big team like the Leafeons and keep them out of the playoffs, it's going to make their ride much easier. I'm not sure that they have it. I think the threats of the Leafeons are huge and varied. A lot of good checks for things. Even, Crocodiles take down eventually the amazing bulk of Crest. So I'm going to give a slight edge to the Leafeons on this one, mostly just off gut and shallow roster woes of the Sawsbucks. Next up is the Grand Bulls and the Escavaliers. This is a big match for the Grand Bulls in particular. As of right now, they are tied for the longest losing streak in GBA history, going 9 losses in a row. If they lose this week, they will officially become the most losing team in GBA history as far as streaks and overall record goes. So they are really going to be hungry for this one. They've got some really good trades going on. As a matter of fact, I believe a trade between the two of these teams goes into effect this week, and that means we could be seeing Crobat for the Grand Bulls and Rotom Wash on the Escavalier, if my memory is correct on that one. I am actually going to give this one to the Grand Bulls. I think it could go either way. I think this could be a good week for Nexus to bump up his numbers and really get a confidence boost. But I think at this point, Kyle Deathstroke has managed to trade and work and rework his team to a point where it's a much scarier team than it has been, and I don't think he wants to officially take that title away from Steve for the longest streak. I'm pretty sure he would much rather be sharing it. Next up is the Hawluchas and Red Sox. The Red Sox really only need this just to keep their range at the top of the playoffs. The Hawluchas are probably going to be really hungry for it to move up. At this point, I think the Hawluchas probably have the better team, but I think Nick's probably still playing a little bit better. If you've been following him on Twitter, you know he's kind of been getting into Hearthstone a little bit lately. So we'll see if the addicting Blizzard card game is going to affect this coach's focus and, maybe open up some logistical holes for the Hawluchas to take advantage of if he doesn't really play right, because I do think he has to play this right. He's going to have to bring some specialized things and really play smart, because the Hawluchas have a fair amount of bulk, some great setup options, and the ability to just, plow through some stuff when they want to, as evident by this week. So I'm going to give a edge to the Hawluchas. I want them to win just so it'll be more competitive and tight-knit playoff race. But I think Nick's got as good a chance as anyone has ever had to win that match. Next up is the Arizona Deoxys and the San Jose Sharpedos. I'm going to give this one to the Deoxys, despite the fact that I think the Sharpedos have, generally a better run. I think Gubbs is still just a very intimidating coach for a lot of people. He's still got an amazingly well-balanced team. And we've seen, Tom struggle against some of the higher-tier, more threatening teams in the league. He tends to do a good job of taking down some of the other people, but is maybe struggling a little bit with some of those guys. And I think the Deoxys are going to be a team that can steal a win from them fairly confidently. Next up, Utah Jasmine at Pittsburgh Steelix. For all intents and purposes, I should give this one to the Steelix, as I think they have the potential to do some major damage with their team. I think Joe is an amazing coach. However, I'm going to give this one to the Jasmine just because Joe has already just voiced his, his problems with his own patience and limiting things like that. If you watch Cooper's video, it's live recordings of everything. You can even sped up, they're still running 20 to 30 minutes, and you can see the battle clock routinely go down to about 15 seconds for virtually every move, and that gets in a lot of coaches' heads. It was probably a big factor in the win against the Sawsbucks. Shady managed to maintain his patience level and really take out a win. I don't think Joe's going to do it. I think Joe's probably going to lose his cool if he doesn't get in a position very early on where he can control the match. I think he's going to lose patience and probably make a couple of silly plays. If he can, in the first 3 or 4 turns, get some kind of setup or just major momentum shift going for him, I think he can very easily win it. But Cooper just tends to play so ultra-conservatively and intelligently that it's really hard for anybody to get that much momentum early. Last up match is the Oklahoma City Thunderous New York Yankees. This is very similar to the Sawsbucks Leafeons match, and it actually kind of affects them as well too, as all of those guys are Kanto Conference guys, and all of them are fairly close as far as win-loss records and their chances at getting into the playoffs. I think that it could go either way. I think the Thunderous need this a little bit more at this point. But Shady's going. He's rolling off momentum, and when he does that, he tends to do good. He managed to sneak back into the playoffs at the end of the year last year, and he can very easily do that again this year, whereas the Thunder has managed to kind of fumble things at the end of the season and not make it to the playoffs, and we could be seeing a repeat of that. I want to say that Alex is going to be hungry enough to not let that happen and is going to come out swinging, and I think he's got a scary team. I think he's probably been looking at what Shady's doing. He's probably got a pretty good grasp on it. I'm going to give him the edge on this one. I want to see him do really well. However, it's going to be rough because Shady's probably playing some of the better games of his GBA career right now. Anyways, that's all I've got for the predictions. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, leave a comment on what you think's going on with the league, how you think everybody's doing, what you thought were some of the better matches of the week, who you think's going to win next week. What do you guys think the playoffs are going to look like right now? It's the top 3 teams from each conference are going to make it into the playoff. So who do you think are your top 3 teams from each conference? It'll be interesting to see kind of where everyone lies and who thinks who's going to make it to the playoffs. So let me know. Leave that in the comments. It'll be cool for me to read it and kind of see what you guys think the teams are at as opposed to what I think they're at. Anyways, that's all I got. So thanks again for watching, guys.